Cool. Everyone hear me okay? Oh, yeah, that's loud. Afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you're all not going to nod off now after a bit of lunch. This is going to be an exciting and interactive session, so thank you very much for coming along to Code Generation Through AI. Why it is amazing, why we need to be careful. So, hi, my name's Paul. I am the founder and CEO of Groundwork Apps. I do a bunch of things. I've been an MVP. I've written some books. It's enough about me. If you want to find me anywhere, I am P. Battisson on every social media channel because there's not many Battissons out there, so it's very easy to get the handle you want. So, no one needs to listen to more about me. We are here to learn about code generation with AI, and more broadly, I want everyone in this room to leave the room understanding how something like ChatGPT, a large language model, an AI model works. So we're going to start off with a bit of a primer about AI so that everyone's kind of level set as to what AI means, what generative AI is, and what a large language model is. So we're going to do a bit of level setting groundwork first. Then we're going to play an interactive game. I will be asking for 5 willing volunteers or 5, suckers that are going to get brought up, and we're going to play a game together that's going to hopefully shed some light on all of this stuff. We're going to learn from our game because this is still a learning session, and then we're going to talk about AI for code generation, some rules, some warnings, and how you can make it work best for you. So hopefully that all sounds fun, and we have 40 minutes to get our understanding. So let's talk about AI. Has anyone here heard of AI? It's been in the news a little bit. Probably, hopefully not on your Microsoft stack this morning. AI stands for artificial intelligence. If this is the first time you've learned that fact, this may be a bit of a whirlwind tour for you. But artificial intelligence is an extremely broad term. It's like music. So who here has had a client say to them, I want to do AI, right? Yep, number of hands. I've had a few clients I had a VP of sales recently say to me, going to do AI this year. And I was like, great. What does that mean? No, we're just going to get AI done because we need to have AI because everyone's got AI, right? And saying AI is a bit like saying music. So when someone says to you, I want to do AI, what someone's doing is they're saying, I want to do music. And you go, well, that's great. That's very generic. And within AI, we have different types of AI. There's different algorithms and different types of AI systems. So we have machine learning is a very popular one that gained traction a few years back. You'll probably have seen machine learning was de rigueur for a while. And there are other ones. There are classification, there's natural language processing, there's image recognition. There's lots of different things that use different algorithms under the hood to learn as a machine. And when we say learn, we really mean just kind of get good at guessing. And this is kind of like a genre of music. So it's a little bit better than someone saying, I want to do music. They're saying to you, I want to do pop music or rock music, which is a bit more helpful. And then within each of these genres, we have specific implementations and specific kind of AI systems below that. So generative AI is the one that everyone's heard about, is why you're all here, and is the one that has become really popular because of ChatGPT and Gemini and all these others. And that's a specific style of music within that genre. So it could be Britpop, could be K-pop, could be whatever you want it to be. And so what we've got to keep in mind is when someone, say you were running an events planning company for a wedding, and for anyone who's got married, you'll know how fun and experience wedding planning is. And imagine that the bride said to you, I want some music for the wedding. What do you want? You want Pachelbel's Canon, or do you want Slipknot? They're very different vibes you're going to get at the wedding. So this is why I'm kind of doing this primer up front is, we hear a lot about doing AI, but what a lot of people really mean is doing specific things with AI. So now that we kind of understand a little bit more about what we mean, let's talk about large language models, which are really the basis for generative AI. And generative AI is a pretty simple concept. It's AI that generates stuff. Other AI classifies stuff. Other AI marks stuff up or translates it. And so generative AI uses what is called a large language model. And what that does is it takes a large volume of data. And when I say large, the internet kind of large. Okay, so ChatGPT, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, was trained on the internet. So just scrolled through the internet and learned all it could. It then constructs a probability model of what's next. And this is the most important key fact around all of this AI stuff, is all we're doing is teaching a computer to be a good guesser. Okay? I hate to break it to anyone in the room, but the AI model doesn't understand a damn thing. It's thick. It's really good at guessing, okay? As humans, because it's a chat interface, we get really good at kind of anthropomorphizing and adding a human kind of response to it. But it's not. It's just getting good at guessing. And the way it gets good at guessing is that it reads through 1 million sentences and goes, I think that if you say the word once, the next word might be upon. And then it might be a, and then a time, and goes like that. It's just getting good at guessing. And then what we do is once we've got it to go through and understand all that, we repeat it again and we test it and it gets better and better and better. And if you want to go into the maths, there's all these curves where you're trying to find local minima to optimize things. But this is why it costs billions of dollars to do this. To train a chat model like ChatGPT costs tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in computing power. So if anyone here wants to find a quick way of getting a few $1 billion in a bank account, say you're going to build a large language model, go and get some VC funding and you'll be absolutely minted. And just remember to take us all out for drinks. And then what it's done is once it's learned all of this stuff, it then is used to generate new output using probability. So when we talk to our ChatGPT, our Gemini, our Bard, our Copilot, our whatever it is, all that's doing is we are saying, I want you to do this, and it is then coming up with answers based upon what it's seen before. It's guessing based upon what it's seen before. And this is why we need to be careful when we're on about it for code generation. So, the GPT in ChatGPT stands for generative, stands for pre-trained, and it stands for transformer, which is a big architecture for neural networks, which is how all these things learn. I've decided that today I'm going to launch a startup right here. It's called ChatPB. No brand infringement meant. Because I want some of those sweet billions, right? Who doesn't want to be a billionaire? But I'm really, really cheap, so I'm not going to pay for computing power. I'd like 5 volunteers. So can I have 5? All you need to be able to do is read and know a few words. If all of you know at least 20 English words, you'll be fine. So can I have 5 willing? If there's not willing volunteers, I will choose people, and this is recorded, so you can't say no. So come on, 5 people. Yep, please come up. 5 people, just, come up. 1, 2, 3. Yep, 4. Have we got one more? One more person, come on. Yay, there we go, our 5 people. So thank you very much. Please give them a round of applause to our 5 beautiful people. If you could all stand next to each other in a little line there, and please take a whiteboard. So, we have a lovely team. On the back of the whiteboard, could you write your name, please, just so that when we hold it up in a minute, I don't have to try and remember people's names, because I can't do 2 things at once. So, these are my neurons. Neurons, please wave. Instead of going out and spending millions and billions on computer systems, I have gone and got 5 beautiful neurons. I have Steve, I have Ollie, I have Will, I have Nina, and I have Dave. Round of applause for our neurons. So, the game we're going to play is we're going to give them, we've got some training assumptions about our neurons here. Hopefully you are all going to pass these tests. All of you understand English, yes? Cool, that's a good start. All of you have either heard, read, or been told a story in your lifetimes. None of you have never heard a fairy tale. So, you've heard Once Upon a Time, in a galaxy far, far away, best of times, worst of times. You've all heard a story. Good. If one of you hadn't heard a story, this was going to be a very depressing kind of conversation. And all of you can come up with a word in English, right? So if I were to say something, you'd come up with a response. So, Steve, if I said 0800 00, you'd say?
118.
Oh, close, 1066. But, we all can infer things based upon stuff we've heard before. And you're all able to learn, right? Good. And finally, can you all hold 3 words in your head? Is anyone going to struggle with that? No, that's a good start. So it seems I've chosen good neurons. So we're going to play a game first of all. And what I want someone in the audience to shout out is a theme for a story. So it could be pirate, could be space, could be fantasy, could be just any sort of theme you want to hear a story about. Dragons, thank you. So each of you, and now we're going to write a little first line. All of you is going to write a word down, but you're not allowed to see each other's words. Okay, so we're going to start with you, Steve, and you're going to write a word. Ollie, don't look. Sorry, yeah, Ollie, don't look. You can all shuffle along a little bit if we want to give a bit more space. So all write down a word that you think is going to be your word in that sentence. So do not use once upon a time, but it could be once upon a time there, right? So, but it's a story about dragons, so just have a think about what your word would be in that opening line of the story about dragons. So all write down a word, and they can't see anything else. And so this is the very first level of training for our neurons. I'm going to keep on referring to them as neurons because it's really dehumanizing. But they can't see what others have written. They don't know what's going on. So we're going to turn around the whiteboards one by one in a minute, and we're going to get a sentence. Who here thinks it's going to be a very good sentence? It's probably correct, but we have hope. Right, we all ready? Ollie's coming up with a full sentence. It's one word. You got one word. Good. Okay. Steve, there. Ollie, thrones, dungeon, fire, and cave. You went for cave because it rhymes with Dave, didn't you, Dave? So, their thrones, dungeon, fire, cave. I mean, Hollywood blockbuster, right? So, if you could all erase your word. There is a little rubber on the end of the pen if you don't want to get dirty fingers. You can get dirty fingers if you... So that's the first level training. And as we can see, my neurons are not really doing well at the moment, and my Series A venture is not going to come in. So we're going to do something different. You're all going to think of another topic in a second, but when we do it this time, you're going to write a word, Steve, and then Ollie, you're going to be allowed to look at it before you write your word. And then Will, you are going to look at Ollie's and Ollie's only before you write yours. Nina, look at Will's. And Dave, look at Nina's, okay? So you're going to have a bit of a context window. So another topic, please.
Politics.
Politics, great. Nice, friendly, non-divisive topic. And I would ask, given recent events, that we are sensible and do not upset or offend anyone or are politically unfair. So Steve, you've got the easiest job because you just write a word. So write a word that's going to start our story about politics. Now, Ollie, you're going to come over and cuddle up next to Steve. You're going to see Steve's word and Steve's word only, and you're going to write a follow-on word for that. And remember, it's going to try and make sense as a sentence. So hopefully Steve's not really throwing you under the bus. Ah, okay, Steve's not throwing you too much under the bus. Right. Don't look, Nina, come on. Right. Don't look, Dave. Okay, so you write a follow-on word for that. What are we gonna? Did anyone ever play like I can't remember the name of the game. As a kid, where like someone would pass a story around a room from ear to ear and you whisper it. Yeah, this is like that, except far more expensive. So, all good? Right, we're going to start off again. Steve, we have Prime Minister is very ambitious. I think that's fair. You don't become a Prime Minister without a round of applause. We've got a good sentence. So what we've seen there is, because all my neurons are very, very smart, really, is they're all able to make a good guess at what the next word should be once they've seen the previous word. If they can't see the previous word, they're just jumping in the dark. So we're going to go for another one now. And this time, it's the two previous. So Steve, you got the easy job. You just come up with a word. But Will and Ollie, you can then see Steve's. Nina and Will, you can see Ollie's. Yep, okay, great. So one more final topic, please. Please don't do religion. Come on. Pirates. Pirates. We have pirates. So. Will, you can look at that as well? Okay? So Nina, you can look at Ollie and Will's, when Will's written his. And we can probably, I mean, if this isn't the best sentence we're getting, then like, I'm probably going to shut this program down, I'll be honest. But hard reset. Dave, have you seen Nina and Will's?
Just Will's so far.
That's all right, Nina's. And Nina, you've seen Will and Ollie's, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is just showing how LLMs build up context. Okay? And effectively what we've done is we've really trimmed down the learning process because all of the team members here are at least 18 years old. So yeah, they've had 18 years worth of experience that we haven't had to pay for. Got a word? Cool. Take us away, Steve. Captain, Jack, didn't, dive, deep. Pretty good. Once again, a very well-written sentence. And so as you can see, the bigger the context window our neurons have looking backwards, the easier it is for them. Thank you very much. Can I have another big round of applause for all of my wonderful neuron volunteers? Please pass the boards back. Thank you very much. The pen should just stick to it, I think. Just dump it out, throw them on the floor. I'll deal with them in a minute. But thank you very much, guys. Thank you for being such wonderful volunteers. So, who'd thought in a tech conference you'd be writing on little whiteboards, eh? So, how did ChatPB do? If we lock the doors, I'm looking for seed investment, and we're just going to do a big whip round here. But what do people think? I mean, as we had more and more context, things got better and better, right? Yeah. And what we've learned from this is that context is key. So when we're doing all of this, all our neurons were doing is using a probability setup, a probability model to determine what the next best word should be. Now, when it came up with captain and then Jack, some people might have thought sparrow, some people thought didn't. We have all these different words, but it depends on your experience and your context. And as we can see with this graph, over time, the amount of context that large language models can hold has grown exponentially. This is a logarithmic graph. So whilst on this picture it looks like that, if it were a non-logarithmic scale, it would look like that, okay? Just shooting off towards the moon. And what you can see is when ChatGPT, the original model, came out in 2018, there was around 500 tokens it could have in its context. So 500 words it could think about at once. ChatGPT 4 Turbo, which came out recently, has 128K context window, and you can see there are others up there that are up to 1 million. And the bigger the context window, the bigger the context size, the better the guess will be, but it is still just a guess. So, what do we have to remember? None of these things understand anything. They just know how to make a good guess. And this whole game and everything is leading up to this one slide for us as we now start talking about code generation within our system. Because we've all read the news stories. I mean, so hands up in here who's a developer or writes code. Great, and hands up. So that's pretty much all the room. Have any of you read an article recently or seen a headline about how you're going to be replaced by AI? Like, yeah, everyone has. How many of you are actually concerned about that? As a genuine question. Anyone really think that's going to happen? Or no, I mean, first of all, project managers would have to give us actual requirements that are easy to understand. But there's all of those things. But when you are looking at these things, when you're reading these headlines, it's really important to understand that it doesn't understand code. It just knows how to make a good guess. So when you are using these tools, you have to keep that front of mind. So you might ask then, why would you want to use one of these things if they're only good at guessing? Well, in 2022, GitHub, and I will add here, GitHub, who own GitHub Copilot Coding Assistant, found that developers using it were 55% faster than those who didn't. So yeah, I mean, 55% faster is good. And are there any engineering managers or like people in the room that might be in charge of hiring and firing? Because if so, please ignore that. But it's a significant improvement, right? You want to, as any developer, like you want to get rid of the boring stuff, right? One of the things I love most about working with Salesforce is one of the most boring things ever, which is that I haven't had to write a login screen for about 15 years. I've never had to define a user object, which just makes me so happy. I don't worry about storing passwords. Like, anything you can do to make your experience quicker and faster is better. So there are a number of generative AI coding assistants out there. So you've got GitHub Copilot, Codium. This is Einstein from Salesforce. Don't know if anyone's heard of that. Amazon Q is Amazon's bundle of everything now. They've got all sorts in there. OpenAI have Codex, which is what is behind ChatGPT for code generation, and Tabnine is another big player in the space as well. So what I want to share is a few ways I've found using these things useful, and a few warnings I would have around it. And I'm just going to jump back to this slide real quick. Faster and better are two different things. I've often said to people, who here has heard of Google's move fast and break things? Everyone heard that? Yeah. Move fast and break things. Sounds really dynamic. The reason those words go together is often when you move fast, you break things. It's not necessarily a good thing, okay? So faster is not always better, and you need to keep that in mind. So the ways that I have found, kind of generative AI in my coding really useful, and I do this every day. I code every single day, and I found it useful doing a number of things. The first one is auto-suggestion during development. I used to be a .NET developer for my sins, but the thing I loved more than anything was IntelliSense in Visual Studio. Oh man, that thing was brilliant. If you use GitHub Copilot or Einstein or any of the other plugins that we've just mentioned, you can plug them into VS Code and others, and they will give you code suggestions as you're writing. And it can be really good. I was writing some code yesterday where I was populating a bunch of JSON for test data, okay? And, typing out 500 lines of JSON, I'll just stay over here. Typing out 500 lines of JSON is no one's idea of fun. But the system was able to quickly identify what I was doing, see the pattern, and start to produce some stuff for me. It's really good when you're working through trying to infer what you're doing. It's not always perfect. I use it a lot for skeletoning classes. So as I said at the start, I've written 2 books on Apex. I, off the top of my head, couldn't tell you what goes in a batchable interface. I mean, I could make a good guess at it, but you got me and ChatGPT guessing, so we're just going to get a really ropey guess here. So I often use it for things like that, where I say, can you skeleton out for me what should go in a batchable interface? Okay. Nobody, if anyone in this room ever feels that as a developer you need to know every method, every signature and everything on an interface, you don't. That's what Google or ChatGPT and things are there for. So it's really useful if I want to skeleton out a class, skeleton out an interface, or if I'm doing something that's extending another class. It's really, really handy for that. And it's really good for helping me write better commit information and documentation. We're a room full of developers. We can all be friendly. Who here, hands up, writes really good documentation and commit information? So I said, hands up if you do. Yeah. We're among friends. We're not good at it, are we? We get the work done, you do your testing, you're happy with it. You close that ticket and get on to something new. You don't sit there and write about it. That's a future person's problem. Future Paul will come in and remember what it was meant to do. I use this a lot, especially if I'm doing a lot of work. And if I'm doing a very big set of changes, or if I've got a very complicated class, it can really kind of speed up that process, because number one, it writes out a bunch of stuff for you. And then number 2 is you then have to go through and read that stuff and check it's correct. And that's the important part, checking it's correct and making sure that it is and that you've understood it properly. So now that you've kind of seen how I find it useful, and other people may find it useful in other ways, I have some rules of engagement around how I would say you should or shouldn't use code generation tools. Now, everyone in here is a developer, so the first point here might be a little bit moot, but it's still a really important point. If you can't write it yourself, don't use it, okay? If the code that it's writing is code you couldn't write, don't use it. And when I say that, so I don't know Rust. Rust is a very popular programming language. I've never written anything in it. I've worked with enough programming languages I could take a stab at it, but if I asked it to write me an entire app in Rust, there is no way I could debug that. I was chatting to someone last night, I don't know if Matt's in the room, but and he was saying he was working with some of these tools, and like he's a very experienced kind of developer, knows what he's doing. But there was an error in some code that had been generated for him, and it was a loop that was off by 1. It had used less than or equals rather than less than. It took him 3 hours to figure out where that had gone wrong. Like, if you know what you're doing, you can go through and use these things. But if you couldn't write it yourself, you shouldn't use it. Really good kind of, metaphor for this, or similar idea is, who here's used Google Translate before in their lives? Like when your kids are doing their French homework, or you were doing French homework at school, if you just put in like the question and Google like spat out a bunch of stuff, your teacher would know like, oh, you've got really good at using that tense that we haven't learned yet. Yeah. It's obvious, right? It's the same thing here. Don't assume the code is correct. I often find that it isn't. Like, it will make good suggestions on simple pieces. It will make suggestions based upon what it's seen on all the code that it's worked with. Now, when you think about how it's been trained, think about what data's gone into training it. So it's gone through every public repository on GitHub, for example. Apex as a programming language is not up there in like the top 10 popularity in the world, is it? Like, yeah, we all know it's JavaScript and TypeScript and Java and C# and probably Rust and all these others, and Apex is kind of a bit further down. So Apex also looks a little bit like C# and Java though, doesn't it? So when your AI assistant is looking through your code and making suggestions, I've had it populate things for me. I'm like, oh no, that is Java. Like, it will do things that it's making a guess upon based upon what it can see. So be really, really careful and aware. Don't assume it's correct. A popular one that happens for me is, I write the name of some fields on an object, and I'm going through and I'm populating them in some code, and Copilot thinks that I've chosen bad field names because it thinks that the field name shouldn't have an underscore in it, or should have a triple underscore C, or have something different. And I then have to go through and correct it. And do you know what? If you're doing that all the time, you need to be very aware. The biggest one, never ever share proprietary code or data. Okay? If you're running something locally against your own code base, that's fine. If you're running it and ever using data, use test data. Don't use real people's data. And more importantly, never upload your stuff to a public, never upload it to ChatGPT or anything like that without explicit consent from the owner of A, that data, and B, that code. When ChatGPT first came out, Samsung had one of their teams upload a bunch of their code to ChatGPT. That team no longer worked for Samsung. It was a lot of proprietary IP that was suddenly available out there for anyone else to use. And a big thing to think about here is who's going to get fired. Is the only way I can put it. It's not a nice way of putting it, but I use a code generation tool to produce a bit of code, and in there, it just deletes data. Or it has without sharing instead of with sharing. Or it just does something different that it shouldn't do. If there's a breach or a problem or that, who's at fault for putting that into production? Is it the tool that's generated the code, or is it me? It's me. So you've got to be really aware of those sorts of things. And then finally, this is the biggest tip I can give you, is to turn it off when it's not helping but hindering. When I'm using these tools, I will use them, and there's just a point at which you'll just sit there and get exasperated. You just go, when it's entering the wrong field names again for you, or coming up with things again that are incorrect, just turn it off. It's really simple to turn it off. Go back to coding like it's 2021, back in the good old days. But just turn it off. You don't have to use it. It's there to help you. As soon as you start finding it to be an irritation or to it doing things that are just incorrect and costing you more time to fix, turn it off. And the final thought is don't worry. Your developer career is very safe. And I just wanted to share some examples of 3 different use cases where these AI models get it wrong. So I should have asked my neurons this earlier, but which one is bigger, 9.11 or 9.9? I hope everyone knows it's 9.9. But as you can see here, ChatGPT does not. Even to the point where you get it to do the calculation, it still thinks it's bigger. And it thinks it's bigger because remember when we did that piece where you were looking at the next word? Well, what ChatGPT's done is it's split 9.11 and 9.9 into 9, full stop, 9, and 9, full stop, 11. And which one's bigger out of 9 and 11? It's only making a guess based upon its rules. It's not smart. This is a Google search example. So how many World Cup finals has Yugoslavia been in? Apparently, unbeknownst to most of us who follow football, Yugoslavia have participated in 8 World Cups and were known as the Brazilians of Europe, repeating their World Cup win in 2002 by defeating Argentina in the final. I may have missed that World Cup. I feel that this is made by the Yugoslavian Ministry for Sport. Right? It's just guessing based upon data. There are many, many good and funny examples around this. And the final one, what was the biggest selling album of the 1970s? The biggest selling album of the 1970s was Thriller by Michael Jackson, released in 1982. What's even better, though, is that whilst it was released in the 80s, it became the best-selling album of all time, and its success spanned across the decade, with a significant portion of sales occurring before it was released. So, I mean, that's a business I want to get into, if I can sell things before I've made them. So yeah, your developer career is safe. Go back, understand the rules I've said, these tools are fantastic. They really can help you be far more productive. Sometimes I sit there and I work with it and I'm just like, this is genius. And other times I sit there and I want to throw my laptop. So just keep that in mind. And if anything else, whenever someone starts talking to you about, can't we use code generation tools to do this? Can't we use AI? Just remember, they're asking you, can we use a system that's really good at guessing to do it? So thank you very much for coming along today. I hope you found that a little bit amusing and enjoyable. I've learned something. If there are any questions, I'll happily take them now. Do we have any questions? And can you all come up and be a neuron? Yep, go on. What's what we got?
What's your favorite one of those AI?
I mean, we're at a Salesforce conference, so I should say Einstein. But I use Copilot all the time. Copilot I use day in, day out, because it's native in VS Code. It's got a nice chat interface. It does a lot of things, but also it works with other languages. So my day-to-day is not always just Apex and JavaScript for LWC. I do a few other bits and pieces. So I found Copilot works really well. Einstein for developers is good. It's a bit more task-oriented, I find. So whereas Copilot is a little bit more like having a pair programmer, Einstein for developers, I find at the moment at least, is a little bit more do this for me. But yeah, and I've used some of the others, but Copilot was just easy for me to access and get on with. So I think it's about $15 a month or something, so it's cheap as well. Yes?
So I haven't used Copilot yet, but does it learn from your local code base, your own org's code base, or does it learn from anything which is on the internet?
So all of these models learn from everything that's on the internet, every single one. When you run Copilot in VS Code, it will understand the context of your project to make better suggestions. So, you know what I was saying about the fields? Excuse me, I'm bringing the fields down. If I bring the field metadata down, it understands that that field exists and it can kind of reference it, and so I get better responses on there. If I don't have the field metadata in my local project, kind of on my machine, the guesses are a little bit more like, well, I think it should be called this. So yeah, Copilot typically runs locally on your VS Code, but it can have your project in context. So again, this gives that kind of useful dynamic when it comes to the Salesforce world of if you are working on smaller kind of packages of code and bundles and not bringing the entire code base down all the time, are you going to get as good a response? So you just need to bear that in mind. Yep.
Have you seen anything in this space at all? Declarative stuff like flow or validation rules or something like that?
I haven't yet, but I don't think it'll be far from. And the problem with, and this is Paul spitballing. So, the problem with doing it for Flow is just an abstract on like Apex. Under the hood, it's writing SOQL queries and Apex for loops. So adding it in for that, you might as well just use the code generation tools to write a trigger. For validation rules and things like that, I can't see it coming too much because of the fact that you'd have to be very specific with it as to when it wanted. What you could do is use like ChatGPT or something to say, or Copilot in your browser, say, I want to have a validation rule that will fire when, on these conditions, can you write me the formula for it or something like that? And so you could see it for that, but I wouldn't see it creating them and deploying them itself. So is there another question anywhere down the front? Or? Oh, yep. Einstein under the hood uses a bunch of these other LLMs, and I think that, and someone from Salesforce can be correct and honest about it, but I believe under the hood it's using a mixture of different LLMs as well as some of their proprietary stuff. The big difference with Einstein and all of the Einstein pieces is the trust layer, where it won't send your data, and it just builds up that context window on your org. So when you're using Einstein for developers, it will have, I mentioned that context a minute ago about in your local project. Einstein for developers has that context around your org and has that understanding, whereas whereas Copilot or something, you need to give it that context. Einstein for developers should be better on Apex. But again, in my experience, I've just found, I personally, and this is how I code, so you may get different setups, and people like to code in different ways. I have found that I like to write things and have it act as like my little buddy on my shoulder helping me. Other people like to use Einstein for developers to say, do this for me, write this for me, give me this setup, and then go from there. So it depends on how you prefer doing it. Does that make sense? Anyway, yep.
What's your view on using it for things like unit testing? Would you ever trust it?
So unit testing is actually my favorite thing. Like genuinely, unit testing is the most important piece of code you'll ever write, and that is the hill I will die on. Like, if anyone wants to come at me about it, you can do, but like your unit testing code is your most important code. You can use it to skeleton things again. Like it's not going to do that bad, but I personally write my unit tests. Like I do a sort of pseudo TDD because of how Salesforce is. And I find that process helps me understand my code better and helps me think through wherever I made a whoopsie in my code. Like, there'll be edge case and things that you'll only find as you're testing as you are writing that testing. If you're doing the most boilerplate code like ever, then do you know what? Like it can help knock that through. But again, follow the same rules. Read it through yourself. If you couldn't write it, check it. Is it doing positives? Is it doing negatives? Is it doing bulk use cases? Is it checking for errors? Is it checking permissions? All of that stuff. And if it's not, then again, it's that help versus hindrance thing. Anyone else? Any other questions? No, well, again, thank you very much for coming. I'm around the rest of the day if anyone has anything else they'd like to talk about, and enjoy the rest of London's calling. And I think we've done that bang on time as well. So, I mean,